Sarah and I are going to talk about embedding Oracy in a school curriculum and practice. In Oracy Cambridge, what we work with teachers in schools in the UK and abroad to help them do exactly that, to embed Oracy in the school curriculum and practice. And by Oracy, I really mean the effective use of spoken language, just as literacy really means the effective use of reading and writing, of written language. And we're not academics who sit in the ivory towers of Cambridge and think up clever things to tell teachers. What we do typically is go out and find out what really good teachers are doing already, and then distill that down to the essential information that will help other teachers to develop their own practice from that. So really all we do is based typically on school-based research. And I'll say just a little bit more about that now. We think it's useful to think of Oracy having two aspects, which are two sides of the coin, if you like, the same coin. The first is learning through talk. And by this, we're really talking about the Oracy skills of a teacher. How does a teacher organise the use of talk, spoken language in the classroom to help their students to learn? And really, how do they manage to achieve what is increasingly being known as dialogic teaching, in which spoken language is used to the best effect to help young people learn, their students to learn in the classroom? And the other side of the coin, the other aspect, is learning how to talk. That is, developing young people's Oracy skills, the actual instruction that they can be given to develop their spoken language skills to cope with different kinds of situations. So when we're working with schools like Sarah's school in Dubai, what we would typically do is have a series of sessions, first on learning through talk, in which we will be really saying, well, what does research tell us about how best to use talk in the classroom? How can we help you learn from what other teachers are doing, or just gain some confidence in that what you're doing already is great because research supports it. And so, for example, I can't go into the detail of this now, but the sort of thing we will explain is that research suggests that the most effective teachers balance authoritative presentation when they're instructing or lecturing or informing in some way, with interactive dialogue in which the students take an active role in constructing knowledge themselves, in asking questions as well as answering them, in relating to each other's ideas, and being able to use talk actively for their own learning. And then the second aspect, Oracy education, we can call it, because it really means putting Oracy in the curriculum. And this is important because Oracy skills are no less important than skills in reading and writing, but typically they have been treated in that way. And I think you yourself will be aware of how in the modern world spoken language skills are valued in employment and obviously in personal life and social life too. And we know now, from, as I say, from seeing what effective good teachers do, we can see how young people can be taught how to use spoken language effectively in different social contexts. For example, how to make a presentation to a public audience, how to work well with other people in a group, how to help somebody else to learn, how to listen well, and so on. And we can go through this in a series of workshops. And I thought I'd just mention that the research also shows that most Oracy skills are not language specific. If you know what makes a good speech in English, well, most of those same features will constitute a good speech in any other language. There will be aspects of constructing an effective presentation that will transcend any particular language boundaries. And I think that's an important aspect of Oracy education. Okay, so I'm now going to pass over to Sarah to say more about how this all took place in her own school, Dubai College.
Thanks, Neil. Right, let's see if we can seamlessly do this. Okay, Neil, could you confirm, can you see my screen?
Yes.
You can see the PowerPoint. Brilliant. Okay, hello everyone, and it's a privilege to be here today sharing the work that we've been doing at Dubai College and with Oracy Cambridge. So as you know, I teach English at Dubai College in the United Arab Emirates, and I thought I'd just start by giving you a bit of an overview of who we are very quickly. So Dubai College was founded in 1977, but actually in a bungalow, and then it moved to this site that it was gifted by the Sheikh at the time, and it was originally in the middle of the desert. We were surrounded by sand. We were about as far as you could drive in Dubai, and there was one road that led to it. Obviously, fast forward now, we are a very modern school that is also combined with very old buildings. We've kept our heritage, but we're located, some of you might be familiar with the geography of Dubai, and we're located at the bottom of the palm. So we're very much not in the desert anymore. We are surrounded by a very cosmopolitan and modern city. And I think that underpins who we are as a school. And that's why we have decided to not only focus on Oracy, but to reach out and to work with Oracy Cambridge. So I'm going to very quickly try and run through for you how we have embedded Oracy into our curriculum and practice. And our journey started actually a number of years ago, and that was initially through the Harkness model, which is used predominantly in America. But following the pandemic and the online learning that our students had for 2 terms, we decided that we wanted to refocus on getting that connection and that human interaction. So our first year of embedding Oracy was last year, sort of post-pandemic, but at that point we were doing a mixture of online and in-school face-to-face learning on a rotational basis for our younger students. And because at Dubai College we are an evidence-informed research-engaged school, we have staff who are always conducting research. They are undertaking masters or MPQ qualifications, and the school funds that. So we have a long-standing practice of supporting staff in research. And we felt that actually not only was that sort of social emotional connection important following the pandemic, but we made our learning and teaching focus last year either Oracy or the science of learning, and some staff were doing both. And by making a focus very explicit, that helped us to actually unite the staff room and start embedding Oracy into the curriculum and how we actually conduct our day-to-day business here at the school. Partnerships and mentors are obviously a great way to establish this. And we paired up with Oracy Cambridge. I was working with Alan Howe and Neil, and we were also working with James Mannion for the science of learning. So we have 2 specialist leaders in education, one for Oracy and one for science of learning. And the 2 of us are responsible for driving and managing this throughout the school. So to do that, I established an Oracy focus group. Now this was voluntary, and we have 12 Oracy leads spread across departments. As a group, we meet regularly, and we are conducting research, which I'll come on to in a moment. But last year, it was primarily a sounding board of sharing practice and ideas and finding out how we could develop our Oracy, because some subjects, humanities subjects, for example, English and history, are naturally very dialogic, whereas STEM subjects perhaps find the discussion in the classroom to be a little more limited. So we were looking at how we could actually start embedding it. And what we did was we provided a whole staff CPD focus on just the social and emotional strand of Oracy initially, because for us that was important. Students had been online at home, remotely connecting with their friends and their peers and their teachers. When they then came back into school, we were operating on a 2.5 meter social distancing last academic year, and it's compulsory mask wearing here in the UAE. So our students were feeling disconnected. And for us, that was why Oracy was just so important, so that we could actually get students to come back into the classroom and feel that they had a connection. Another way that we also started embedding it in that first year last year was developing common resources and a shared language of learning. In order to embed anything in a school curriculum, everybody needs to be working from the same page, don't they? So we have adopted a framework, and I'll come to that in a moment, but also just pooling these resources into a central location so that students would be getting commonality across the different subjects and different age groups in the school. And for that, that worked really well last year. And the final thing that I did last year was to establish the Dubai Oracy Hub. This functions in two ways. I host online webinars. We have our third one next week. And this is drawing together practitioners and those interested in Oracy from across the world. It's not just the Dubai Hub. We have presenters from the UK. We've got followers in Italy. And it's just fantastic to hear staff, our staff, but also other teachers from primary, secondary, tertiary, all talking about Oracy. And the other branch of the Dubai Oracy Hub is that I'm now starting to support CPD provision out here in the area. So we're able to provide teachers and practitioners who can go and talk to other schools and conferences. So that's just a really great connection that started. So moving to this year, we're in term 1 of our second year of working with Oracy Cambridge. And what we've had is departments choosing a teaching and learning focus. So they had to pick Oracy or Science of Learning. And the reason we did that is because we've now tailored our CPD to be a flexible provision for our staff. Now that we are fully back in school, we're not rotating anymore this year. We have social distancing still, we still have masks. So staff are dealing with a lot of things whilst trying to get back to normal. So our self-paced CPD enables staff to engage with Oracy, but in their own time and at their own pace. So I've created a 5-part Learn Ed course that takes staff through what Oracy is, how to plan for classroom talk, creating a dialogic culture, modeling talk, scaffolding talk, and structuring talk. And those modules, staff watch a short video, there's reading and resources, there's a practical element to go away and apply, and then a reflection, so that staff are really owning their own professional development. Alongside that, the Oracy Focus Group is conducting research. So the 12 Oracy leads are actually doing inquiry cycles in pairs, sort of the lesson study model, but they're designing a specific practice that they want to investigate in their own classrooms. To also make sure that this is fully embedded in staff practice, we have linked professional review targets for teaching and learning to either Oracy or Science of Learning, depending on which department that member of staff is in. So this is making it explicit for staff that actually they need a focus for the year and what are they targeting. Our observation forms for lessons and learning walks have got an explicit Oracy element as well. So it's just kind of making sure that, you know, staff are accountable and are expected to use Oracy, and obviously that will depend on their experience and their subject. Not just in lessons though, we've decided to now really embed Oracy in the wider practice of the school. So our rolling pastoral education program, RPEP, it's much easier to say, is incorporating Oracy, and that's rolled out across the school. So we are teaching explicit Oracy modules to Key Stage 3, so that's years 7 to 8 or grades 6 to 7, I think. And they are actually having an introduction to Oracy. Higher up the school, the pastoral program, whether they're having a lesson on cooking, whether it's a sex education lesson, there are elements of Oracy within the lesson. So we're making sure that it's embedded there as well in the pastoral side of the school, not just the academic. To really highlight the work that we're doing and to build that sort of community spirit, we've literally coming to the end now of our Oracy month. November has been Oracy month here at Dubai College. We have been pushing the Voice 21 Oracy Odyssey for our Key Stage 3 students, and they have loved it. They have to sign off 12 different types of talk across their lessons, extracurricular activities, the sports pitch, the music rehearsal, wherever they use talk, they can get the different types signed off, and they have a deadline of next Tuesday, and the box in reception is already filling up because they're desperate to get the voucher, the shopping voucher that is the prize. But that has worked really well, both for staff and students, so just raising the profile and making them aware that Oracy pervades their daily lives at school. And today is also No Pens Day Wednesday, run by the I Can charity. So it's literally going on around me. I spent the day taking pictures and tweeting, and it's just been brilliant to see talk all around the school today. The final thing about embedding it and how we've done it was to use this framework that I mentioned. This has allowed us to have a consistent and shared language across lessons, and it was developed by Oracy Cambridge in collaboration with Voice 21. And because of our setting, we've also translated it into Arabic, and we're looking to do that into other languages as well, so that we're really making it an inclusive framework that students can work with. So that's how we started. That's our 2-year journey, so to speak. But obviously, being research and evidence informed, we wanted to actually see what the impact was and how we were measuring that for our students. I had anecdotal evidence from staff and students that there was progress going on, that it was having an impact, that staff explicitly using the framework and other resources were raising participation in lessons, they were improving the confidence of students, but this was anecdotal. It was coming out through comments in the staff room, students' reflections in tracking sessions with their tutors, and at parents' consultation evenings as well. So we were getting anecdotal evidence, but obviously I needed something a little more concrete. So to do that, I created an Oracy appraisal tool, which sounds quite fancy, but I actually just took the framework and layered it over a template that Neil had provided from Oracy Cambridge that actually gave students a bronze, silver or gold band for all the different elements. So it's all very small there on your screen, but if you take the framework and sort of put it kind of vertically, and then I gave a descriptor for each one. Now, the two very small examples there on the page are what I would call the maximum grid. It's everything on one page. But for some assessments, teachers were just taking the physical strand, for example, and just looking at the physical skills. So students were given a baseline assessment, and for us that was crucial to actually start measuring their progress. So the pilot was in year 8. We looked at geography, English and history, and we started by doing a solo talk focus. So they gave a presentation or a speech, depending on the subject. We allowed autonomy for how the departments wanted to do their baseline, but they were using the same tool. And after the capture, we then put in place some interventions and made a final appraisal towards the end of the summer term. Now, our baselines across the board in all 3 subjects highlighted that physical skills were actually the area that our students were weakest at, so to speak. And we found this wasn't surprising. They'd just come out of, obviously, the lockdown, being at home, the social distancing. So it wasn't surprising to us that actually the presentation of speech was something that they'd lost. So to deal with this, we decided to focus our intervention on physical activities. And I created this Oracy pack that is full of games for eye contact, for gesture, for tone, for pitch, for pace. So for every aspect of the framework, there are a couple of activities that staff could just use as a starting activity or a transition or a plenary at the end if they wanted to. So staff were using that in many creative ways. And we then made sure that our final appraisal was just focusing on that physical strand. We zoomed into that. So what did we find? Well, we tracked 84 students in geography. That was my final capture, just to make the data manageable. And the baseline capture was just looking at these physical skills. And for gesture, initially 20% were bronze, 36% were silver, and 42% gold. For eye contact, you can see it's in a similar range. There was a very even spread across it. The final appraisal was interesting when you look at the data. We moved students out of that bronze area, as you can see, and the growth in the gold category was quite staggering, that actually just spending a unit of work using gesture, playing games, activities, focusing on how they presented themselves, we saw that increase. And it was a similar thing with eye contact as well. So overall, we found, it's a small sample, but we found that over half of our students made at least half a band of progress. That meant they went, for example, a low bronze to a high bronze, or a high bronze into a low silver. So we halved the bands to measure that progress through. But what was really interesting, that across all the physical areas, 72% of them made progress, which really just showed to us that if we have this consistency, if we have a tool to measure, and staff are really focusing explicitly in lessons, not just learning through talk, but learning to talk, that actually the impact was significant indeed. What we're now doing this year is rolling this out further. So my Oracy leads for their inquiry cycles have taken these baseline captures and are now working on specific areas in the classroom that they're going to develop and work on. So that over the course of Key Stage 3, so that's years 7 to 9, we're going to look at focusing on the physical and then moving into the cognitive and the linguistic, so that students, as they come out of Key Stage 3, have had an explicit focus on all of the elements of the framework. And that's our journey. That's where we are now at 2 years on. It feels like quite a whistle stop, but hopefully, Neil, that was kind of clear for you to carry on and take over now, and just kind of round off for everybody.
Yes, thanks very much, Sarah. Yes, I hope that was clear to everyone. It certainly seemed to me a good description of how your one school has really thoroughly embedded Oracy into the curriculum and practice. And I think you've described some of the key aspects to it. And just to say that the Oracy Skills Framework that Sarah mentioned there, it's freely available. If you look on our Oracy Cambridge website, if you just Google Oracy Cambridge, it'll come up, and it comes up there with all the other associated resources with it. So I thought I'd just end by saying, well, why do we think it's important that schools go about doing it in the way that Sarah has managed to do so in her school? We've evaluated several projects, Oracy projects, in either single schools or groups of schools, and these conclusions really apply to the whole range of projects that we've been involved in, and those that Voice 21, the other major Oracy charity, has been involved in too. First of all, it really is important that students get the same version of Oracy across different lessons and subjects, so that they're not going, especially in secondary schools, from one lesson to another and finding that it means something different, that they're expected to use spoken language in the same consistent ways, and they're developing their own awareness of how spoken language is used and how they're able to improve their use on it across different lessons and subjects. Secondly, I think it's important, it's a related point really, that teachers need, in any one school, need to have a coordinated approach and feel that they own this initiative, the Oracy initiative, and that they're pursuing it in consistent and complementary ways. And for this to happen, I think it's obvious that teachers need senior management support. It's not really going to work if just one teacher, an enthusiast, is pushing their own ideas and not really getting any support or any broader take up from the school. We found that just means if that teacher leaves, it's as though Oracy had never been in that school. So they need senior management support, and typically we found that it really helps if someone is appointed as an Oracy lead, as Sarah mentioned. That is a teacher or more than one teacher who has special responsibility for the Oracy initiative. And there needs to be some planning for progression through the years, so that year 3 or whatever builds on year 2, and this goes on, so that students are actually being put on a progressive ladder of development for Oracy as they go through the school. And I think it's also important, as Sarah said, that you really do want to measure the impact that your Oracy initiative has had on the learning outcomes of the students, because it's through doing this that you can convince teachers and parents and the students themselves that embedding Oracy into a school curriculum practice really does pay off. You need that kind of evidence, because they may have a very traditional idea of school being just about reading and writing, and talk doesn't really fit. So if you can show that by introducing Oracy it helps learning across all subjects, which we know it does from the research, then really you're on a win-win, in a win-win situation, I think. So I hope that what we've offered you today would convince you to take up Oracy in your own school if you haven't done so already, and it may have given you some pointers towards it. If you do want any more information, as I say, go to our website, Oracy Cambridge, and you'll be able to find out a lot more about all this there. So thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you, Sarah, for such an informative presentation. And congratulations, Sarah, on the early results of the study. That's really encouraging. So there have been some questions coming in during the session, and I wonder whether we should just maybe start with the one from Fernando. I think perhaps there are some people in the audience who are not as familiar with Oracy. What are some basic Oracy elements? I know you, Sarah, mentioned your school focused on two, on the social and emotional one, but could we just remind the audience of all of the Oracy elements?
Neil, do you want to, or do you want me to? From my lay person.
Well, I don't really mind. There are different ways of looking at that or answering the question, really. One way of looking at it is to say, well, there are different kind of Oracy situations, talk situations that you really need to cover to prepare students for. And if you think about what they are, the sort of things I mentioned were making a presentation like this to an audience, either live or online, which is a skilled task. Then there's how to enable people to work well in teams or groups. There's a team or group situation, which demands rather different elements of Oracy, rather different skills. And then there's also the practice of helping someone else learn, which is what a teacher does using talk. And then there's listening as well as a skill in itself. So there are various aspects of it that can be taken apart and treated as situations in which you want the students to feel confident and able. And then you've got the Oracy skills framework, which if you do look at that, you'll see that what we've put in there are all the different skills that are involved in using spoken language, not all of which will be required in any one particular situation. So that, for example, if you're speaking to someone on the phone, well, eye contact's completely irrelevant. But obviously, if you're working with someone in a group and you never look at them or never show that you're listening by nodding, you're not doing it very well. So that's the way we really try and make sense of it, both for the teachers, but also for the students, so they themselves become more aware of how Oracy works and what the different elements are.
Yeah, and I think also just adding to that as well, and it's only because the question slightly popped as Neil was talking, but I think it's also the kind of the balance as well of quality and quantity. That's another aspect to kind of get through to students, that actually when they're younger, I would say it's getting them talking, it's getting them just to be fluent and confident, and it is quantity. But then certainly, you know, you jump to our year 13s, and for me it's quality. I'd rather one short, sharp, very perceptive comment than a rambling kind of sort of taking over the Harkness table and just going on their own little tangents. So I think you need to get them talking to then refine how they talk as well.
Excellent points. Thank you, Neil and Sarah. And another question from Charles, I think. Is there an already set of steps and stages, like lesson programs, that can be used for a start to get a grip of how to use Oracy and aim for further adaptation to individual curriculum? I'm guessing Charles is asking, is there a ready-made set of perhaps lesson plans that can be taken by a school at a very early stage to try this out?
We have some available, for example, for how to develop students' skills at working in groups. We do offer a set of lesson plans, structures for doing that, and we have a similar set of steps we suggest for developing the presentational talk skills. I think the other thing to say is, though, I think that I think we should hand over to Sarah to talk about this. I think the teachers have got to feel some ownership of the programme, and I think the way Sarah and her colleagues have done it is exemplary, because they've constructed it in a way that relates to things they were already doing that were relevant. You know, so in some schools, for example, some teachers have related it particularly at first to science education, to get students talking in science lessons, to get them working in groups and so on in science, while in other ones it's been based on a different part of the curriculum. Do you agree, Sarah? Do you think that's...
Yeah, and I think, you know, certainly it's different, and I think it's different from primary and young children and secondary, and they are completely different beasts. And certainly when we were starting our journey before we partnered with Oracy Cambridge, I found there was a lot out there for primary. There was a lot of sort of how to foster group discussions, and that really is, I think, the focus in primary is getting them talking as a group and having that confidence. But there wasn't much there for secondary, and we very much, when we started, took that, the framework was our anchor. We were kind of very much, how are we going to cover these things? And then it was what's already going on in different departments. So as English, we were able to say, well, we teach delivering a speech. It's part of the GCSE spoken language element. So we were confident to help develop resources for that sort of solo talk. Whereas in history, they were like, well, we often do debate and group talk, right, looking at sources. So they kind of came back with ideas. And that was what the focus group was for that first year. It's like, well, what is going on around the school? And, you know, science would say, well, we don't really do Oracy until you talk to them. And they're like, oh, no, we do have them standing at the board, talking together, Mark. It's like, that's Oracy. Yeah. And so I think sometimes the label can confuse people. It's just, what is the classroom talk? How is talk being used in the room by the students, not just by the teacher? Yeah. And I think once we looked at it with that flip lens of how do students talk in your room, and what do you therefore think you need to work on? And for us, a lot of it was participation, often quiet girls, different ethnicities as well, have different approaches to talking in lessons. So for us, it was very much bespoke, but based on kind of going out, what's going on out there, audit what's in place, and then working out what needed patching, if that makes sense. But we didn't use anything off the shelf. It was very much developed in-house for us.
Yeah, that's great. Justine, it's probably worth mentioning too, isn't it, that we have embedded Oracy activities in terms of resources into the Cambridge primary path materials.
Oh, thank you for mentioning this, Neil. Indeed, Oracy framework has been adapted to the English language teaching environment and the needs of the English students, and Cambridge primary path has a very strong Oracy strand running through it. I just put in the blog, in the chat, a link to our blog post that is a really nice introduction to Oracy and kind of talks about step by step and how to embed Oracy in an ELT in a primary classroom specifically. So take a look at that. I'm just mindful of the time, and there are more questions coming in. There is one from Angelina asking what kind of administrative support can be given to promote Oracy.
Wow. Time. We all want time, don't we? Yeah, I think I'm lucky insofar as I have a specific role. Now I only get 3 periods of one contact time for that. So, you know, it's not like I get a lot of time, but just having time to meet with my deputy head learning and teaching so that I can talk to her about what's going on helps. Being able to do learning walks in one of those periods a week and just getting out and seeing what's going on. But from administrative support, I mean, I'm lucky that we've got our IT department, our SharePoint site here at school is managed very well. So where the resources are kept and where everything is centralized, you know, I've got a team that can help keep that in order. We use one platform. I think that helps as well. Everything through Microsoft Teams does make things easier. But I mean, is that sort of where the question was going? Sort of like what support is available? You know, I think it's also, you know, have a group, not doing it solo. Somebody does need to own it and drive it, but actually, you know, I know that my Oracy leads are doing what they need to in their departments. And, you know, today is No Pens Day. It's amazing to see what's going on around the school that I wouldn't know as a single teacher yet, because the leads are all feeding it back up. You can see they've had the autonomy to do that. So I think delegation. Yeah.
I think this sounds like a very comprehensive answer. I can see an answer from Angelina in the chat box. I think that answers the question. There's another question that this time around working with beginner learners. Wilbur from Colombia is asking.
Oh, stop me.
Sorry.
So Wilbur in Colombia is asking, saying, thank you for this great opportunity to learn about such an interesting topic. How to develop Oracy skills in beginner learners? So sort of CFR A, A1, A2 level. Neil or Sarah, who would like to?
I mean, I'm not a primary specialist, but through the hub, I'm working with a lot of primary schools out here. And what I'm seeing is that circle carpet time of, you know, picture stimulus, of, you know, comfort, like children will talk about something they're comfortable talking about. And I think very much at that young age, it's probably using stimuli and ideas that actually they know a lot about. They probably know, you know, it's a show and tell is a great way in, I would have thought, if that's kind of where that question is targeted, that actually, you know, pictures, symbols, I see lots of listening ear pictures up, and getting them familiar with what the different things, what volume might mean, and what kind of eye contact means, and active listening, and kind of just teaching those skills, I'd have thought. But Neil, you're more the primary expert with your research.
Well, yeah, I think what we found is that one way that's very effective is if you've got a class of primary students whose language abilities are mixed in terms of the target language, if you can arrange groups so that there is someone in the group who is more fluent than the other ones, they can actually act as a mentor for the student who's developing their language skills, and so they can, if necessary, resort to the first language at first, and the other student can then say, well, what Janine's saying is this, and help them get more confidence. Because as I said, Oracy skills are not language specific, really. I mean, I've done talks like this. My Spanish isn't that good, but I've done them in Spanish. And I'm following the same principles, you know. And so I think if you can get some mutual support amongst the students for the beginner learners, I think that will really help them develop confidence in a safe situation.
And I think that's the same at secondary. If you've got additional language students, you know, I do find that we did something, one of my colleagues did something amazing, that actually they let them recite poetry in their home language. And the confidence that student had just reading the poem in Urdu was just, that for them gave them confidence. And then you see them blossom afterwards. So I think, you know, it's back to that, you know, quality and quantity, but actually if you just need to get them talking, let them use their own language, is one way to get them talking at any age, I'd have said.
Yes, because as Sarah said earlier, sometimes it's simply just getting students to feel that talk is worth doing, you know, in class, and that they're capable of using talk and using it effectively. And as Sarah said, the physical aspects, you know, voice projection and so on, are going to apply whatever language they're using. And I think you can build those skills in a multilingual context, really.
Thank you. And so you covered primary and secondary, and from my perspective, in pre-primary, we have inserted or embedded Oracy skills for very young learners in Cambridge Little Steps. And there we're focusing on not so much language skills, but all the kind of body language and eye contact, developing very young learners confidence when they speak, stand up straight, this sort of thing. So you can, regardless of the language level, I think you can embed these skills in all age groups.
Yes, and I think another thing that we've found is useful is you can actually offer students specific relevant vocabulary about talk, and they can be learning new words about talk. They can be learning about words like collaborate, words like such things as clarity of expression. You know, they can actually learn, what does it mean to be clear? You know, have you spoken clearly? And I think just even quite complex. We was in one classroom, and a little girl came in from the classroom into the classroom from a playground, and she was crying, and this is a 5-6-year-old, and with a little boy, and said, what's wrong? And she said, well, I wanted to play again, but nobody would play with me. And she said, teacher said, is it okay now? She said, yes, it's all right. They played with me in the end. And the little boy said, yes, in the end, we compromised. And that was one of the words they got on the wall as talk words, you know. So it was great because they're actually using it in an active way like that.
I think that's, and you know, taking that another step forward, it's also sentence stems, isn't it? Actually giving them a mat, a card on the table.
That's right.
Prompts. you know, and we developed for our older students, and they do enjoy playing it. I've got laminate cards for the Hartness table of build, challenge, add, question, and it's got prompts on the back, but we almost play a game of like, right, have you played your challenge card this lesson? Have you actually used that skill? But just that confidence of holding that piece of plastic, it is amazing how it just gives them that, you know, it's like the comfort blanket, isn't it? It's a little prompt there in their hand. But for younger students, I think mats and sheets and kind of a bank of words is kind of a really good tool for them to use a variety if you're starting to work on quality of talk.
Yes, you're right. I think, as you say, the cards are useful. If you look, I've mentioned the Thinking Together site, our Thinking Together site in the chat. If you just Google it, it comes up. On there, you'll see like there are cards. When people are working in groups, young children, they can say, "What do you think?" on the card, and they can pick that up and read that out. Or I think this because, and in that way, you're building these kind of reasoning skills into the talk, which is what you want, and that kind of thing helps.
And it's also making, you know, not gamifying, that kind of really dumbs it down, but just making something fun. You know, the talk detective idea is a great one as well. When students are almost appraising each other's work, you know, and there's nothing more fun than watching, you know, an EYFS, you know, kindergarten, you know, putting on some props, but going around with a clipboard and counting the number of times somebody did or didn't speak, or what good words did they hear? Were they using the vocabulary? Where did they hear? And once they're kind of aware of how talk is being used, I mean, it's the same with older students in literacy and numeracy. As soon as you have to explain something or you have to mark something yourself as a student, you then understand the quality. And I think that can start, you know, make it fun when they're little.
Great, yeah, definitely.
Talk detective, I love it. I've not heard it before.
I can't take credit. It's not my idea.
Yes, just I did want to make a little plug that in Cambridge Primary Path, we have used these little props and we have created word cards, little cue cards they're called, for the students to have in their hand and kind of give them that kind of extra boost of confidence. And but let's move on. I think we've got time for one more question. Farouz from Uzbekistan is a public speaker and he set up a virtual TED Master speaking club. And he's asking, many of the participants in the club are still fearful of speaking in public. Any tips on how to improve the situation?
Oh, it's a tough one. And we've got tonight a version of TEDx running as kind of the climax of our No Pens Day. And I've got years 7 to 12 talking. And it is often the gregarious, confident students who put themselves forward to do it. But I'm running a speech making course next term for years 7 and 8 as an extracurricular activity. And I'm going to build that. So it's going to start off, you know, they're only talking to just 2 people in the room in a small group. And then you add in a few more, and then it's in front of a class. And then it's in front of your, you know, maybe your year group. And then, you know, you have to build it. I think, you know, I think anybody would be terrified being made to step out in front of a large audience of it's the unknown, it's the strangers. Although I actually prefer strangers to people I do know, but you know, maybe I'm different. But
I know what you mean.
Yeah, like talking to the staff room terrified me, but you know, talking to a sea of parents, I'm fine. So I think it's, you know, I think I would say, you know, getting over that fear is kind of, you know, there's the old prompts out there, aren't there? Imagine those people doing something silly and like you kind of you almost ridicule your audience in your head and you're fine. But I would actually say for students, it's just building the audience, you know, get them confident just doing it in their mirror at home. And I let students, when they're first developing a speech, to film themselves at home and send me what I would call like a video draft, so I can see them in their own environment, in their own comfort of their own room, doing their talk. And so I can see how good it can be when they then come in and clam up because they're in front of their friends. So that's what I would say, of just building the audience for confidence.
Yeah, I agree. I remember first seeing that kind of thing done very well at School 21, which was the first school in Britain to really embed Oracy into its curriculum. And what they first of all did was, in these were students in year 7, so they're about 12 years old. They got them to work in groups of about 6, and what they each had to do was simply prepare a 2-minute talk on a subject that they felt confident about. It could be a hobby or a film or something that they felt confident about. And then they would present it just to this group of 6 and then get the feedback. And it was a safe situation because everybody had to do it. So you weren't going to be that horrible to the next person because you're going to have to do it in a minute as well. And in that way, they could build up. And by the end of the year, they were able to give talks to whole classes or even to assemblies of longer than 5 minutes, you know, could be 10 minutes even. So I think it's exactly as Sarah said, you can build it up from a safe situation, a very short talk, which has all the elements of a good speech. And build it up so that you're able to generalize that to operating in different kinds of situations with confidence.
I think also just, I'm sorry, just, you know, I know like time's up, but just, you know, just kind of what Neil was saying then about sort of kind of building the confidence in a small group. You know, we know that students aren't the same. You know, some students are very strong with their numeracy, others are strong with their literacy. And yet Oracy is very exposing in a way that they wouldn't necessarily have their work shown to the rest of the class. So I'm very acutely aware with the younger students that I want them to talk and there is an expectation that they talk, but I can't expect all 22 of them to be able by the end of the year to stand up and deliver an amazing keynote. Some will and some won't, and I think they need to know that there isn't an expectation that they're all going to be brilliant public speakers. It's just how they can make their own progress, and it's that individualization that I do think is important, because suddenly it's like we're doing Oracy, everyone must talk, and you can just see some of them panic. And so it's kind of just, it's an individual journey, and we do it for numeracy and literacy, but do we do it in Oracy would be my argument.
That's great. Thank you very much. I'm afraid this is all we have time for. Thank you again for a brilliant session. And I think our audience enjoyed it as well, judging by the comments in the chat box, which I've been kind of keeping an eye on. And it does seem like there's plenty for teachers to explore in this topic. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to plug it, our World of Better Learning blog, where you can find lots more information about Oracy and how to embed it in the ELT classroom, ideas for activities for different age groups. So I invite you to explore the World of Better Learning blog. And thank you again to our speakers. And I hope our audience can join us for the next session, which is at 11:30 UK time with Claire Ross. And Claire will be presenting and sharing her fun ideas for developing learning skills in preschool learners. So join us for that if you can. And thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening.
Bye-bye.